what happened.
Okay, thank you. I got the notice saying that you're taping this.
Okay,
Right.
I'm recording it now if I can find it when it's over. There's some
Thank
cloud somewhere.
Well, thank you.
Thanks,
So-
Sandy.
There's, so you go ahead and Pam, and Becky asked, well, you might want to pose your question again, Becky, then Pam
Yeah.
can take.
My question was, how did this impetus start at West Raleigh? You know,
Yeah.
what factors came together to cause the church to take this journey or to start the journey?
And I just made the comment, had been making comments, Sandy, that there were individuals in the church that were engaged in racial justice and had interests in that, but it wasn't church-wide. It was more small group, individuals, and that really, in my view, the coalescing factor was Catherine Rittmiller, our pastor, when she came. And certainly the events of 2020, the killing of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. And we're going to talk about what grew out of that part of history just a little bit and how it influenced us. But Kathy can really speak to Mission, Peace, and Justice and what they were doing as a committee, a session committee.
Okay, thank you.
So Kathy, what was Mission, Peace, and Justice? I know you all were talking and yourselves and doing a lot of different kinds of things before we really got started in 2020 on the task force.
Yeah,
Am I
and
right?
that's part of my section that I'll be covering a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just give a introduction before Kathy takes over. We thought there were two underlying questions that we should answer up front. The first one is, why are we at West Raleigh working to dismantle racism? And it's pretty basic, because we know as people of faith, we really have no choice because of the claims that we stand on as Christians, that we are dedicated to follow Jesus's commandment to love our neighbor. It is that straightforward to us. And then secondly, what is our orientation in undertaking this work? Who's our audience? So our orientation is that as an overwhelmingly white congregation, we bring our individual and collective biases and practices that perpetuate racism. We bring that to our task. Not that we are overt, but we have them, and we know that. And as such, the audience for change at this point is first and foremost, not exclusively, but first and foremost, ourselves as individuals and West Raleigh as a whole, as the body of Christ. Any comments or questions at this point? Okay, and then I'd like to know if there are any other comments or questions, as Becky pointed out, looking at the document, anything you want to be sure that we touch on, or questions that you want to make sure that we answer as we go, so that we make sure we do that. Okay, so Kathy, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And remember, we'd like to take questions as you go, and each of us will try to watch for questions, but as you know, I'm reading from a script here and may not see it, so Kathy's going to back me up and stop me if people raise their hand or move close in to ask a question. Okay, Kathy.
You're
Kathy.
muted, Kathy.
And I know that most of y'all are familiar with us to some extent, but just to go over it, West Raleigh was spawned from First Pres downtown, and we were founded in May of 1927. to to service the North Carolina State University, or was State College at that point. At that time, most of the Presbyterian students and congregation and faculty and staff traveled to First Pres downtown. And so they lived around the state, but then they had to travel to downtown. And Catherine was saying yesterday in the service that it was either 2 or 3 cents to ride the city bus. And when it went up to 5 cents, the Presbyterians formed a committee, of course, and looked into what they could do about it. So so then we founded our church, and they wanted something in the heart of the campus community, because we had so many at that time, so many professors who attended our church, and then we had a lot of students too. So it's always been a what we call a university church. It's written into our DNA and mission statement that and we're a curious congregation, just as all of you are. We're curious, and we have values that we value art and action and reflections. So you probably know that Presbyterian Campus Ministry, which is geared towards college students, meets at our church, and we have a room, really nice room set up for them. And their minister, their pastor is housed at our church. And so they meet at our church. And currently we've got students, I think mostly from NC State, but also from Meredith and now Wake Tech and Peace. And I asked, the question came up, may have been Becky, several months ago in our BGAF, that do they have relationship with any Black colleges, like NCCU? And I asked Ashley Ann that in an email, and I didn't get an answer, but I know that they do have their own campus ministry organization in Durham of some sort, but it seems like it would be nice if they made a concerted effort to join with, it could be that there aren't any Presbyterian Black folks in Raleigh area that, want to necessarily go to this program, but the history, and as Pam was already saying, and I think this happened with so many of us, the killing of George Floyd was such an impetus, for our white people saying, what can we do? We really recognize this is a problem now. So what can we do? And then of course, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and it just came to the forefront. I mean, I know Black people have known forever that they are killed unjustly for numerous reasons, and but now it came to the nation's conscience that this was actually horrible and happening. So that happened May 25th, 2020. George Floyd was killed, and not long afterwards, about a month and a half afterwards, June 8th, we as a church, and I think Catherine speared this, decided to do the 21 Race Equity Challenge. And have y'all done that? I can't remember. Any of y'all? It was put together by the Myers Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, and it's you spend 21 days with readings and videos and thought-provoking questions for daily reflection. So we had quite a few people go through that, and and as a result, there were some small groups that did that. And then as a result, these small groups were so interested in what they were learning and reflecting on that they are in existence as today. So it's been over 2 years that they've been meeting very seriously. And I would say that it's narrowed down to 2 groups, but in those 2 groups, there are probably close to 20 people And as an example, we read a lot of books and have discussions, but also last week or so, I think Pam went to it. There was a film showing at one of our members' house. It was at night outdoors on their driveway, and it was a big screen, movie that they watched. And so I think about 17 people went to that. So then June 23rd, not long after that, the session, it was one of our members, Alec Peters, went up to Catherine after church and said, we really as a church need to make a statement against racism. And so and then right away in June 23rd session meeting, the session approved a statement that was written by a couple. I think y'all know Tommy Goldsmith and his wife. They're both journalists. She wrote the statement, and that's what Pam sent to y'all. So do you want me to read it, or are you familiar with it?
Kathy, can I ask you, what was the movie that was shown?
Yeah, I wrote it down somewhere. Do you remember, Pam? I couldn't go.
I don't remember the name of it, Sandy, but it was on Netflix, and you did write it down somewhere. And it was Black women who were talking about the relationship with their mothers and their backgrounds and their mothers' backgrounds. It was a fascinating film. Fascinating film.
Yeah, it's Our Mother's Gardens.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. All righty. So anyway, so they wrote that statement, and then they put it on our website. They wanted to put it first and foremost on our website so the public could see how we felt. And then during that same meeting, the session approved West Raleigh establishing the Dismantling Racism Task Force. And so, the session really has, besides Catherine, has also, I would say, led the way. Mission, Peace, and Justice we've been talking about that all along. And so the task force is technically under Mission, Peace, and Justice, but I would say the idea really came from different parts of the church.
So I've got the statement here, but I would love for you to just
Okay,
read it out.
sure. Thank you. Okay. West Raleigh Presbyterian Church is dedicated to following Jesus's commandment to love our neighbor, and thus we stand in solidarity with all who affirm that Black Lives Matter and repudiate discrimination, violence, and mass incarceration against people of color. We commit to resisting and opposing the culture of white supremacy in all ways, including prayer, education, organizing, protesting, and voting. We also pledge to examine our own unconscious prejudices with clear eyes in order to shape a beloved community that embraces and cares equitably for all of God's people. And it ended up being passed unanimously. I was actually on board and on the session and clerk at that time, and it was passed unanimously. However, there was one person who, and this probably is a little kink, and it seems like a lot of discussions, white people's concern about our using the term white supremacy. So so I think some people find it more, well, they have trouble with white supremacy, period. Some people also have trouble with white privilege. But then I know that REI, when we had the Racial Equity Institute, I remember when I was in one of their trainings, for those reasons they use the term advantage. And and that tells the story too. All the advantages that we had just because we were born with white skin and our parents were born with white skin and passed down all this, wealth and privilege to us. But Anyway, so then we talked to this person about it, and I think, and he voted yes too. So, alrighty.
We're able to do all this in a single session meeting.
Yeah, I think in the prior, I mean, all this really happened fast when you think about George Floyd killed the end of May. And then,
Yeah.
right. So yeah, it was done all in one session meeting. I think, yeah, the Alec Peters suggested that we should do something. And then I think Catherine or somebody contacted Tommy Goldsmith, who's the journalist and writer. And he has a wife who also is very, very good at that. So she's the one who actually did it in time for our meeting, so.
And wasn't she on the board, Kathy? Wasn't she on
No.
session then or not?
No, but Tommy was.
Tommy
was.
okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
So,
impressive. Really.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
It's,
Right.
it's political, organizing, protesting and voting. I wonder if our church would get on board like that with a statement like that. You're looking at the crew of people who are fans of words like that, So.
I know.
Well, I think maybe we can comment a little more on that, Dana, as we go. You'll see kind of how this has rolled out. But I also really have to say that I think the seeds were there, and I think the Holy Spirit had something to do with it.
Okay. Yeah.
I just do, because when you think about it, that just never happens, especially in a Presbyterian church. That never happens.
It's a little bit the luck of the draw who happens to be on session too. You just never know,
Exactly.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, then, Catherine purposely was trying to think of ways we could keep that's one thing we just kept saying to ourselves. We need to commit to keeping our foot on the accelerator, just, momentum, and keep going. And so in July of 2020, we joined with Davie Street for 3 consecutive Sundays. And then in September, 2 months later, we, and this came from Mission, Peace, and Justice Committee, during that time, this was the pandemic and we weren't able to meet in person. And it was just as Catherine would say, a tender time, because, there were so many people who were worried and upset and anxious and about themselves. And then we were also very upset about what had happened with George Floyd and all the others. So anyway, we had the community impact challenges, which we were putting our efforts behind organizations that that work for racial equity. And so we raised money and did a program at church for during the service, a short presentation on a place at the table, which we already were familiar with. We also did the same for Southeast Raleigh Promise, and we did the same for NC Black Alliance, which I was not familiar with before. And it's a wonderful organization that's trying to get out the vote among Black people and make it easier for people to do that. And then, of course, Friends of Oberlin Village. I think some of y'all are aware that we had a panel of during the Sunday school hour of 4 people who grew up in Oberlin Village. And so during the hour, we heard from them what it was like growing up there. And then they lived through the time of segregation and having to move from their Black only schools to, white schools, and the irony of the fact that, that they got poor education because they went into an environment that didn't expect much from them, and so didn't push them and encourage them and give them, the love and support that they were receiving it back home, so to speak. And then in October, that's when our task force was commissioned And Catherine actually still made the recommendations for the people to be on it, but then a couple of people volunteered, myself and Amy Symes, because we just felt called to be involved. In December, we finally came together as a committee, and there were originally 9 members. There was one youth, she was in high school, a young person in her 20s who was a new teacher, and then the rest of the adults. We're down to 5 now, but I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that when Pam takes over. And let's see. And as Pam noted, we were talking about this, a task force meaning is, people usually think of that a task force is called upon to have a narrow focus on one particular topic or one problem, and we deal with the issue and then we disband. But that's not how we're working. We're and we kind of laughed to ourselves that Pam had chosen the word wandered. We've wandered in the desert for 2 years, but then we, looking at it in a positive way, the good thing about we've wandered and meandered and have not gone in a straight line, but we've kept moving. So, and another way of to me describing what we've been doing is exploring and discovering. I mean, we're going down a road that we've never traveled before, so and as Pam has said too, perhaps the Holy Spirit was with us, the whole time, or is with us, and nudging us, prodding us, because I think the core group really, we feel compelled to keep going for the rest of our lives, basically. Then as I said, the small groups have continued, and in August 2020, we became a Matthew 25 church, and we had a zero problem becoming a Matthew 25 church. I think the principles of Matthew 25 are, do y'all remember? It's basically making sure that people are fed, don't have food insecurity. Dismantling racism is another one, and then there's a third one. And Millicent probably knows I think there are only about 11 or 12 churches in our presbytery that have become a Matthew 25 church, and we're on the coordinating body. And one, Sandy would know this, the Peacemaking Network group have been trying to get other churches on board to become Matthew 25, but it seems like the rubbing point for them again is going back to the language about the dismantling racism part, right? That's the impression I get.
That, and at our church, there was extensive conversation about why do it. We were already doing those things. I'm like, okay. But and it was still I mean, I still can't believe you adopted that statement in one session meeting. Our session talked about becoming Matthew 25 for a couple of years. And I don't think we have notified the presbytery that we are. So we need to
let them know.
We need to do that. But we are nothing if not deliberate.
And you were successful, Becky.
Yeah. Right. So to finish off my part right here, lessons learned. One of the good things about our wandering and exploring is that it has made room for members of the congregation to bring forth their ideas too, to, you know, to wholly participate, and being able to bring their ideas and to be more organically engaged in what aspect is the most important to them. So, you know, obviously it really takes all of us, and we recognize the need to connect people and groups in the congregation as they work on dismantling racism, so that individuals, committees, and groups can coordinate their efforts as they need to. And lessons learned, we recognize our privilege merely because of the color of our skin. And one thing I would add too is that as white people, we need to be aware that we do have some influence that has been gifted to us, and connections that can really help further the cause of having racial equity. And so one example, Art Ross, who was pastor for many years at White Memorial Presbyterian Church, which is a purple church, by the way, that he has been very involved with racial matters, and on the Friends of Oberlin Village, or with that committee. And so when they were building the medical center in what was Cameron Village a year or two ago, they saw that they were going to name it Cameron Village Medical Center. And at that time, there was the awareness that Cameron was a huge, prosperous slave owner in the area. And so he was able to use his influence, and because he knew a lot of people on the board of White Medical Center, and he went to the board meeting, brought Joe Holt and a couple other people, and they actually showed them the documentary that they have on their website, and they were so moved, honestly. And then we also had a letter writing campaign that our church participated in, but they were so moved that they gave it some thought and got back to FOV and said, yeah, we'll just refer to the name Oberlin, you know. So that's my part right now.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Kathy? All right, then I will press on to talk a little bit about how we organized ourselves. Kathy's talked a little bit about that. So I want to make the point that we were established June 23rd. We did not have our first meeting until October 16th. So, because we did not have designated leadership, the idea was that that leadership would somehow emerge. So that was part of our wanderings. And as Kathy has pointed out, meanwhile, the church is moving forward and people are doing the 21-day challenge and doing other kinds of things. And they're kind of asking what we're doing. And I, for one, must admit to being anxious, because I like to get in there and, you know, start going. But it's a good thing, really, that didn't happen. But our dilemma became, how are we going to fit into what was already underway when we did start meeting? Actions being led by the congregation and the pastor across the church. And that's what we wanted. We did understand that two things needed to go on at one time. We needed to be playing a particular role, but we didn't know what that was at that point. And nobody really did. I did a little bit of homework and talked to some people on MJP in the session. So it was an opportunity to create that role. At the same time, I felt like we don't have any direction. But we appreciated that people were moving ahead. We didn't and don't want to be gatekeepers, and we don't want to be the initiators of everything that goes on that doesn't engage people. So what we did, and Dana, I really appreciate your asking us to read the session statement, because we went to the session statement and said, this is our anchor. The session has laid out a set of things to do. There are some overarching ideas here, and there's some very specific things. So what we did is we used the language, the verbatim language of the statement to establish 6 goals. And then we listed things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actions, things that we knew were already going on that served and met that goal, and ideas that we had. And we just put them down on paper. And that became our action plan. And we've used it for about 2 years. It's worthwhile noting that we did not put any time limit on achieving anything in that plan. We just wanted to have something to move forward. So what I want to do now is take a look back and to look at that goal action crosswalk. And that's a piece I think that you all, it's one of the pieces I sent. So if you have it handy, you might want to pull it out. Okay, does everybody have it in front of them or not? If you don't, raise your hand so I'll know how much detail to throw out. Okay, it looks like everybody does. The question is, did we as the task force and the church actually do what we said we would under each of the goal areas? Well, we met on July 23rd to look at that question. So if you look at the list, you'll see there are 6 goals with actions listed underneath. And as you know, from those of you who've had a chance to look at it, an action may be listed under more than one goal. And we're not really finished with assessing this document, but here are a few things that we can say about it. First is that we feel the 6 goals we developed 2 years ago are still good reference points, and we will continue to use them going forward. We've edited them for 4 of the areas, and we still need to edit 2 others. That's why you see people's names on those goal areas. Various ones of us are responsible for drafting, because the statements originally are fairly long. So we decided to try to edit those down. We did not do, oh, and one other thing, there's no comment on the depth or difficulty of an action in this listing. So it may be something that was a one-time kind of item, and it may be something longer term. We developed this originally for our own work. And so we all know what all of these things mean. So it's kind of hard to get a grasp of them exactly, but nonetheless, they are as they are as a working document. We did not do everything in the original document in all the goal areas. There were 22 different actions that were in that document, which I had no idea until I went back and counted them. Roughly, we touched on half of the actions in some way or another. We did some deeper, some less so. Throughout this document, there are 19 activities, separate activities, actions that are listed. Some of these were not in the original plan, and that's a good thing. There was space and energy for actions to emerge from other people along the way and to be included, which we heartily gathered ourselves around and supported. We originally were not tied to everything in the plan. You will also note that there is nothing in here about voting. We did not try to push the congregation into saying we are going to do all of these things in the session plan to begin with. What we wanted to do was to try to see, where do people have energy? Is there someone who has a passion for voting rights? If not, let's just rest with that. We're aware it's in the statement. We are dedicated to it. And we did not want to try to force things ourselves. So that's another thing to note. And overall, we really were surprised, Kathy and I were, at what this looked like. So before I go on to lessons learned, are there any questions about this list or what you saw there or would like to know more about? Yes, Sandy.
On Amy Simon's curriculum, is that available for others to use?
You know, I will need to ask her, but I am sure she will say yes. And that it's a 3-session curriculum. She developed it. Kathy, would you make a note for me to follow up on this?
Sure.
Thank you. It's a 3-session. It has got all kind of rich materials, and she developed this for one of her courses while she was in seminary.
I
And
was wondering if we could do it in biblical justice.
okay,
Would you and
Okay.
Kathy, have you already done it? Would it be an overlap for you all, or would you mind doing it, or?
I'm happy to see how we can all do it together. Kathy,
Yeah,
are you?
Yeah, well, what we did it in 3 Sundays in a row, but the curriculum is such that it you know, you could do it practically for a semester. I don't know. So what I think maybe Pam and some other experts went through the curriculum and then just picked out what we could do easily in 3 sessions, right? Is that right?
Well, I'm hardly an expert. I just knew it would
Sorry.
take us a full semester to do all of it. So I worked with Amy. I said, would you mind if we try to kind of cut this down, because this is a course? And she actually did it for a class that was teaching how to develop a course for churches. So, but Sandy, we'll talk more about it. And if people are widely interested in doing this, to see how to kind of do it ourselves. But the
yeah, I
materials,
just thought it was something we could put in our basket to consider.
Yeah. and
absolutely.
It's very interesting, I think, and it is provocative, and it's certainly not boring, and there's some good videos, and you know, so that's definitely worth looking into.
And you know, it might be something that you decide you want to use with your church in some way. So, okay. So lessons learned and challenges for us, since we've looked back at what we did. As Kathy's already said, numbers are useful in some ways, but really the question is, has anything changed in us as individuals, in us as a church, and in us as a society? And for us, we're always ranging over those three areas of our life. And I have to say that we really don't know the answer to that question. Individually, we all have stories of growth that we've had, that other people at West Raleigh we've seen and that they've shared themselves, but we really don't have a picture overall from a widespread number of people within the congregation. Given the people we see regularly engaged, we think there are roughly 25 to 30 people who are active to some degree and supportive at church and outside of church. But equally important, we don't know the number of members who are not engaged in any or very little action to dismantle racism. And while some individuals have received negative feedback one-on-one or secondhand, we do not know how much resistance there is. And it's important, these are all important for us to know. We need to take the temperature of the whole congregation. So that's up on our plates next as we continue the planning, is really to talk about how do we assess where the congregation is at this point, where individuals are. And then we want to share what we discover with the congregation, truthfully and honestly. And we want to encourage other committees and groups in the congregation to do their own assessments in whatever way they think is helpful to their work. So I think that's one area that we need to improve on and press forward with. Again, it'll take a while to figure out how to do that and what to do. We need multiple points of entry for engagement across the spectrum, from adults, youth, and children. And we're looking at all of those areas. We also have learned that we, as a task force, need to have stronger follow through on what emerges from the work that we do. In our discussion back in July, we recognized that we missed one especially significant opportunity to build on work that we did in this past year. So we need to figure out how we make sure we follow through and do that as we go forward. Another lesson learned is how do we refresh our team? As Kathy said, we lost 4 of our 9 people. 2 of them, one was a high schooler and the other one was in her 20s. And this was during the pandemic early on, and we lost them fairly early on. And they had a lot going, each of them had a lot going on. One's getting ready to apply for college and go away. The other one was changing jobs and moving from Durham back to Raleigh. And I must say, I wondered if we were just moving a little bit too slowly for them, because we wandered so widely and we didn't have a lot of structure. I don't know, but I wonder that. So I really want to check in some ways with them to kind of see if that had an influence and what they thought about their time that they did have on the task force. And then there were two older folks, one of whom has a young family, a lot of responsibilities. It was early in COVID. Their kids were home. So that really was overwhelming to him. He is gonna, I think, come alongside and do some research and writing for us that we can use in public. It really is his passion, and he works at the State Archives, so he has a lot of historical knowledge and he loves doing that. So we've kind of decided that we're going to have a core of task force people who do monthly meetings and that kind of work, and then we're going to ask 2 or 3 people to, if we can call on them for very specific tasks, kind of an ally, if you will, within the church. And one of the older folks had a serious health issue, missed some time, and has moved out of town, but also has said, I'd be happy to do some things with you if that works. So once we've agreed on the roles that we're going to look at next, then we can move forward to add folks to the task force. 2 other things that I think are lessons learned: that we need to be patient and let things emerge as they come forth. And an example of this occurred to me, well, it really came up about a week ago. Last year, I threw out an idea to the task force about a church in New England that had decided to make reparations every time that they used a Black spiritual in their worship service, because there was no attribution to anyone, no name, no way to make royalties. Nobody was individual had been attributed. And so what they were doing is they were taking funds that would have been paid in royalties and to pay to make a donation to a youth choir that was composed primarily of Black children. So I threw that idea out because in our music, we use a lot of spirituals and they are unknown. And how can we think about that and reparations, the reparative justice approach? And it just didn't get any traction. So I learned a week ago that in fact, worship committee is starting to think about that idea that was brought up by someone who's not on the task force. So sometimes you just have to wait and see what happens. And then secondly, we have to balance leading and following and supporting other people. So how are we doing on time? Questions or comments at this point? Okay, so where are we headed? Let's take a look at the other document, looking ahead, restructuring roles.
Pam,
Yes,
I wanted to mention about the reparations that the Raleigh Friends meeting put out, that's going to the city council. I don't know when I think it's our church, that one. Beth is not here, I'm sorry, because I submitted that to the session and Beth got it passed on one night. They didn't discuss it but one night and it passed. And so we didn't have a preacher at that time, and our current preacher, I've talked to him about it. And at first he was going to bring it back up to the session, but he talked to clerk of the meeting that was there, Art Chard, and he said, you know, Sandy, this is already passed. I don't see any reason for us to bring it up again. Let's just say we're on board. And he would like to go to the city council meeting if they ever have a time when the city council meeting is. So that's something your church can help our church know if and when this ever comes to city council.
that's great. I'm happy. I'm glad you noted that,
Yeah.
Sandy, because it is on, you know, we're still developing specifics around these roles, but we have a set of things that we know we're going to do, and supporting and being more active and more engaged with that resolution is on the list for us. So we'll stay in touch, and maybe we can, are you the best touch point, Sandy?
Well, maybe Becky, because she's on the session now.
Okay,
But either one of us, we would communicate.
okay,
But
great.
our preacher was glad to see it had passed. And but I'm not sure the Quakers in Quaker style are being very quiet.
They're
Okay.
very patient, and
I was at a meeting. Beloved community is something you need to put on your list of something that you might want to pursue. I was at Joe and I went to a beloved community organizing meeting for Raleigh last week, and the gentleman spoke then about that reparations thing. They're having a hard time getting it before council. But I would say that church is the one to reach out to, because it doesn't come up at session at all, Sandy. We don't talk about race and racial equity at session. It just isn't a topic. So maybe you could put them in touch with, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but that's sort of shepherding it from the community side.
it's John Shuford. You know,
Okay.
one of the things that I could do is contact Becky.
John.
Well, who's the contact? Beth Ware, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Beth
Contact
Ware
Beth.
was on the session when it was passed. She's not on it now. But
Okay.
she was the pusher and shaker that got it passed on the session.
Well, I have it on my list. I have it on my list of things to do, to call John and say, where are we? We want to become more engaged. Where are the opportunities? So I'd be happy for us to have a three-way conversation
Yeah,
about that. If that's
Okay,
something you'd
and I
like
know
to
they're
do.
still looking for additional churches to sign on.
Okay,
If
'Cause we
if
have
the Holy
something on.
Spirit wants to move quickly again at your church and you can do something in one session meeting.
Now, we actually have already signed on. We were an early signer. And again, we did it. Catherine and I were sure. And John came to it was a virtual meeting. John came, he talked about it. And Catherine and I were just sure they were going to say, okay, let us think about it and we'll vote on it next month. They didn't. They said, no, are we ready? They discussed it and had a couple questions for John. And then he excused himself and somebody said, are we ready to vote? I move it. It was unanimous. I was stunned. I was stunned.
But
I
one
will.
thing we should point out is that it is a session commitment. It's not,
Yes.
it has been brought before the whole church. So is yours on behalf of the whole church or just session?
well, the session speaks on behalf of the church. The church, it's not a, we never vote for anything in the church except the preacher.
Well, yeah.
Whatever the session says, we as a congregation, we say we will support the session.
We do. And I had this very conversation with one of our session members. And he wisely said to me, that's right. Because I said the same thing to him, Sandy, that you just said to us. He said, that's right. He said, but in this case, the session is the one that has taken the stand. And what I took him to be saying to me was, it's up to us to bring the congregation along. So that's what we've been doing. The congregation knows that the session signed the resolution. And our idea is this year to have reparations and reparative justice, which the Friends are very clear. John said to me, we used reparative justice rather than reparations, because when you use reparation, everybody runs to the money rather than standing back and saying, what's the justice? What's the just thing to do here? What are the issues? What does this really mean? So one of the things that we have on deck for this coming year is to look at reparative justice and the language, restorative justice, reparative justice, reparations, all of those things are kind of mixed together, and try to educate the congregation, as we're going forward.
After ours passed and it was in the session minutes, there were some questions about it, and I got some questions, and I wrote something that we distributed to the congregation. And then, I asked the couple of people that had questions, I asked them, they were passing on questions that came from somebody else, and I said, who is it? Let me talk to them individually,
Right.
And quite frankly, I can't remember exactly. It's been at least 2 or maybe 3 years ago. And well, no, it was when we didn't have a preacher, so it's been 2 years ago. But we did do some communication, and I think that was, I don't know that people were satisfied, but they quit bringing it up.
Sandy, anything that you wrote for your congregation that you'd be willing to just share with Kathy and me as a resource for how you frame that, I would love to see it.
If I can find it, yeah. I guess we put it in the contact or the weekly word or something. I'd have to go back and see if I can find it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we're looking, watching the time here. We're looking at this document, looking ahead, restructuring our roles, work, and members. A couple of things again to note. The first three items on this document pertain only to us as a task force, because we realize we really need to have some agreement around how we tend to ourselves as an organized group, loosely organized group. The last four have been developed based on what we've learned from the past 2 years. And when we discuss and reshape this document, which I'm sure will happen, we'll add some specific actions to move forward, including what's already going on among the pastors, leadership, and the congregation. So if you just, if we skim down this, you know, administration and functioning as a group, we all know what that means. Communication, I think that has come up before. This has to do with communicating with the leadership and congregation through Did You Know, which is a feature now monthly in our e-newsletter. Black History Month reports, etc. It's all there. And then the second part of communication is to talk with others and learn what they're doing, to understand the intersectionality of our work within the church, because there's so much overlap. And it's one of the things that comes out in that early goals document, because a single action really meets a lot of different kind of goals. And we have to foster our own growth and development as well. Then 4, 5, and 6, assessment. And number 4, we've already talked about how important that is going forward. We want to continue a community presence and try to engage with that a little deeper. Number 6, we want to connect with other congregations and organizations to find out what they're doing, especially white congregations, and how they're going forward and what we can share with them, and also learn from them. And then I've already talked also about multiple points of entry. So regardless of how these roles actually shape up, there are 5 things that we know we're going to be engaged in already and or continue. The one is Did You Know? We'll continue that because the congregation has really responded in a positive way across the board. There's a lot of history there. I think it appeals to some of the academic folks in our congregation. So we'll be continuing that. Supporting Raleigh Friends Resolution, we've talked about that. Catherine and her family are going to be taking a sabbatical this year in 2023. They were supposed to do it in 2022, but because of the pandemic, it's going to be in 2023. And this is a pastoral congregational sabbatical. The Lilly Foundation has given us a grant to support this work. And looking over here for some notes that I had. And they are dedicated to the fact that a pastor is on sabbatical. The congregation needs to be traveling that pathway, the study part of it, along with the pastor, so that the two come together when the pastor returns to say, now, how does this influence our church life together? So Catherine and her family are going to Germany, Northern Ireland, and South Africa, and some other places as well. But those 3 were specifically chosen for her study and focus. And the purpose is to learn about how these countries have dealt with their racial and religious strife and fighting, and to see where are they now? Where are they now? Is everything smooth sailing? Well, we know it isn't. That's not the way things work. So we're going to be, the whole church will be preparing for the sabbatical. And then we have talked about Mike Wiley is going to come, Mike Wiley Productions, and do some work with us. And we've also talked about going to the Justice Equal Justice Institute to their information and their center in Alabama. So that's on our radar, and that they'll be gone June, July, and August. So we'll do work leading up to it, and then when they get back, there will be a special small group that works on that. So it won't fall to the task force, but we want to know what role that will be useful for us to play. We also are recruiting a new pastor for community formation. And Kathy is on that search committee, and they have been very busy for several months. Kathy, anything you want to say about that?
No, we do have somebody we're interested in, so we just maybe this coming week we will find out if it's going to work or not. Yeah, but it's a new position. It's not, as Catherine said, it's not in the book of order. It's not a it's not a defined position with the Presbyterian church. It's our own unique position that would be partnering with our pastor. So even though our pastor would remain as the quote head pastor, this person will work equally, I guess you could say, on efforts with our pastor and share responsibilities. And we're hoping to find somebody to help us with inclusion and diversity and opening up our church to make people who come there feel like they truly belong.
So is this an ordained position?
Yeah.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
been approved by the committee that approves such things. So
Yeah.
it's all official, but it's just different.
Yeah, I wondered because our church is looking not racially intentional at all, but looking for a community outreach person. I'm sorry about my dog. Anyway, and we chose not to seek somebody that's ordained.
Okay.
Anyway, just wondered.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's good.
Okay. And also the last thing is that we are moving in the direction of joining One Wake. And I wondered if you all are members of One Wake. Okay.
I keep sending it, my husband who's on mission outreach, I keep sending him to the meetings with, you guys need to explore this. But nothing is happening. And that is a significant chunk of change, as it is a percentage of your church's budget. And I think that it's going to come down. My sense is that we are, as an organization, not ready to loosen the purse strings to let somebody else decide how our money's going to be spent. But I could be wrong. I keep waiting for the Holy Spirit to act again. But since Sandy brought up that the reparations letter sign on passed in a single meeting, I have hope.
Okay, so let me ask, I'm going to end on this. I think Kathy has some other questions we might want to explore, and then we can close. Kathy?
Oh, you want me? Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't know you wanted. So the questions I was thinking that you might want to consider, and I don't know that we really have time to do it now, but I'll tell you what the questions are, and then you can think about which one interests you at this point. how does your church address racial justice, equity, dismantling racism? And Becky partially answered that by saying that's not something that you talk about in session. That's one question I had. If you were to form a dismantling racism task force, who are you thinking you could include besides the usual suspects, you know? And then what are the most important lessons you've learned from our biblical justice studies on racism? Because we've done a lot of studying, and is there information from our studies that you've shared or will share with your congregation? And then the last question is, how are there ways that we can leverage our work together, all of our churches, to help each other and be supportive?
I'd like to say something if I may.
Please.
First of all, I want to just thank Pam and Kathy. I'm very much impressed by what you all set out to do, are doing, and hope to continue to do. I'm when I am part of similar discussions, I'm a member at Davie Street where the congregation is, it's well, we have a couple of non-Black members, but it is a Black congregation. Yeah. So my question is, when this comes up, like, what is your church? What is the role of Davie Street in dismantling racism? I think that we need to have a role if we don't already. I'm not sure how you do that. I think back years ago, I don't even remember what the book was, but the Presbyterian Church USA was suggesting that all its congregations read some book. I don't know. I want to say white fragility, but I don't think that was it. But whatever it was.
Waking Up White.
It was Waking Up White.
Waking Up White. Thank you. Yes, I knew it had something to do with the bed. But anyway, I was on the session at Davie Street at the time, and I suggested that, our session read the book and encourage our members to read the book. And, I was immediately shut down and said that that's not, we have a different outlook or something. Anyway, my feeling has always been, even if it's an enemy, you want to keep up with what the enemy is doing. And so, so you should read it. But anyway, I only give that as an example because there are many things, obviously, that need to be done. Obviously, coming from me, it's different from coming from you, but we are Christians together and Presbyterians together, and I'm certainly affected by what happens at, other churches or in the community. And I'm going on as I always do, losing the point, but but I really do wonder, especially in a denomination like the Presbyterians, where the number of Black folks is, infinitesimal almost. I think we're at 2%, I think, for all people of color. But, what I feel like, right now I have removed myself from everything. So I'm not doing anything. And therefore, I don't know if I should suggest some other people do some stuff, since I have said, no, I'm on a sabbatical or whatever. And that's many questions in one, but I would like somebody to address, especially the concern about what Davie Street's role is. And let me just say this too, is that, again, years when I was on session, we would get these appeals from West Raleigh, from St. Andrews, from First Press, all good ideas, wanting Davie Street to support and come together or even help plan some event or activity or program. And I would say that's all good, but we're a small congregation. We can't do for all. Whereas most of the other people will say, well, yeah, if people are reaching out, we should. And I would say, no, we don't have to say yes. We don't have to say yes, or we don't have to say yes right now. Let's say we got too many things going on. Let's, you go down the road or something like that. But so anyway, I just want to throw that out, because in these efforts to reach out, well-meaning, I think, well-intentioned. To me, that puts a burden on Davie Street that sometimes we cannot handle.
Yeah, and I
Hmm.
think that points out really something about the white church and white people in general, is that we're looking for others to tell us about the problem, and solve it for us. And actually, I think it would be really interesting, Melissa, if your church did revisit waking up white or white fragility, just simply for the, to me, sometimes it's, I guess, cathartic to read or learn about in very pointed directions the experience that I have had. And certainly the Black community deals with white fragility. You know, you can't be Black in this country and not deal with white fragility every day. And to me, there's something, I don't know, affirming about exploring that a little bit and learning about the white perspective on that. So I don't know. But if you want to do a book and talk about it, and it's a Black author, the book is The Other Black, I think it's The Other Black Girl. It's about book publishing, actually, but a single Black employee and in an editor role at a publishing house, and then what happens when the next Black employee as hired as an editor comes in, and the struggles there in the white world. So if you wanted to go in the back door, you could study.
I have
a
not
Black-
read that book. It was up last year in my book club as a choice, but it didn't make the cut. So
Oh, okay. It to me, it was very interesting. I guess I think partly because of being the parent of a child of color who's grown up pretty much in a white world, and looking at a career choice that's also pretty white, and just trying to figure out what what that means for her and what kind of experiences she's going to have when there is somebody else of color in her place of employment. It was just, to me, it was very thoughtful.
I'll take a look.
Well, Pam, what do you think? It's 1:32, and I really think those questions that I read out, I mean, I would love to see us really get into a discussion now, and I don't know when we could take that opportunity to do that. And I would love to hear from everybody, not just me and Pam, and
Why don't
Well,
we continue this on the 12th, our next meeting? And we could also maybe spend an hour on these questions on follow-up, and then maybe a half an hour on where do we want to go with our next study.
Are you going to be here next week, Pam, or the 12th?
2 weeks. 2
Yeah.
weeks.
I will not. I'll be out of town on the 12th, but you guys can go ahead. You guys go ahead. Kathy,
Well,
will you be here?
I think yes, but I really would like to do it at a time when when you're around. So if we could do that too.
Millicent, what were you gonna say?
I may not be here. I'll be in town, but I'll have house guests. And I guess it sort of depends if I can talk her into being part of it or whether I need to be the hostess with the mostest, so to speak. I don't know whether I'll be on or not.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
not on the 12th, so that makes it the 19th. Are you guys available then?
I am.
I am.
Let me take a look and make sure I'm telling you the truth here just a second.
Yeah, no lying. Biblical justice tries to be really honest.
Okay, I'll try to live up to that standard, Becky. Let me see. I can't rely on my memory in any way. The 19th.
I'm like,
Yes, that's good for me. Kathy, how
Okay,
about
well,
you?
let's do that on the 19th. We can spend the whole time on it. On the 12th, we can talk about
what's
our
next?
next lessons. There's several, I think the Outlook that had the thing about Black women, it's not really a lesson per se. I've ordered some. I haven't gotten the paper copies yet, but as soon as I get them, Pam wanted one and Kathy wanted one. I ordered some extra if somebody else wants one. But we can look at that. We would have to sort of do that from a curriculum point, but I think we can discuss that on the 12th, how we could do that as a curriculum. And then other things, maybe Amy's stuff, we may have some information about that then, and we'll discuss other things. So the 12th, we'll just discuss different things. Beth should be back with us, and Joette, and we can discuss things. And then the 19th, do these follow-up questions. And I've recorded this, so I guess I should stop the recording. And let me stop the recording. Okay,